Hi everyone, my name is Casperanza, and in this video I am going to read the astrology chart of Michel Foucault, and also a little bit about the astrology of his death from AIDS, which I think is super fascinating because the astrology lines up with it really well. Michel Foucault also was a very kinky philosopher. He was a homosexual, and he is probably one of my favorite philosophers. So the first thing that really jumps out about Foucault is that he has his sun and Venus in Libra in the 12th house. And his sun specifically is conjunct the fixed star Spica. So I do have a video where I talk about the fixed star Spica and I briefly talk about Foucault. So you should definitely check out that video. And in that video, I also talked about Nietzsche. And so if you go to Nietzsche's chart, just for a second, I just want to compare them, because Foucault and Nietzsche, they're both philosophers, and Foucault actually thought of himself as a Nietzschean fundamentally. Foucault was inspired by all kinds of people like Heidegger and Althusser, all kinds of intellectuals, but fundamentally Nietzsche was his main inspiration. And if you look at their charts, again, Nietzsche also has his sun at almost 21 degrees of Libra. It's at 22 degrees of Libra, conjunct Spica, in the 12th house if you go by whole sign house system. And in many ways, I think of Foucault as carrying the torch of Nietzsche, because they both focused on power and genealogy. Nietzsche focused a lot on the genealogy of morals. He wrote a book on it, like how did morals come to be? While Foucault is very different, but still fundamentally the same. He asked how does knowledge come to be? And I think you can see that difference between their moon signs. I'll talk about that in a bit, but just going with their suns, right? Again, they're both born on the exact same day. So I almost think of, in a funny way, I think of Foucault as a reincarnation of Nietzsche. And Nietzsche was all about the will to power, right? Because his sun is opposite Pluto. What is Pluto? Pluto is the planet of power, quite literally. It's also the planet of death and transformation. And if you know anything about Nietzsche, Nietzsche wrote that famous quote, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." He was all about self-overcoming, creating oneself, transforming oneself, not getting stuck in these rigid categories. So you can see the Plutonian influence with Nietzsche. And you can kind of see it with Foucault, except Foucault has his sun square Pluto. So, and it's at a wide square. So while Nietzsche really talked about the will to power, which is fundamental to his philosophy, Foucault takes that power idea, but he shifts it to power relations and with knowledge. And I think that you can really see that with his Venus and Libra making a square, because Venus is about relationships. Venus is a very relational planet. So I can see how with Foucault there's more of an emphasis on, it's not like this power within people, but it's power that it works through people and is around people and works through institutions. And again, you can see this difference between them in the sense that Nietzsche has his moon in Sagittarius. Sagittarius is the seeker and is the original philosopher. It's also a very positive sign. Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter. So the philosophy can have a very optimistic motive behind it. Like Nietzsche talked about embracing life as an opposition to Schopenhauer, who turned away from life. So you see that positive Sagittarius energy. Well, if you read Foucault's philosophy, it's actually not really positive or negative. It's very diagnostic. And again, it's the archaeology of knowledge. And you can see that with his moon in Aquarius, because unlike Sagittarius, which is the seeker and the philosopher, Aquarius is almost like the encyclopedian. It's the person who knows everything. It's the person who's very concerned with knowledge. It is the water bearer. It's about bearing water. It pours water. And it makes sense why Foucault is one of the most quoted philosophers in the humanities, because Aquarius is a humanitarian sign. It is the sign of the humanities. Again, it's the water bearer. And so Foucault almost has this kind of activist or humanitarian, very knowledge-oriented emphasis in his philosophy. And then if you go to another person, like ContraPoints, who is very similar, she has her sun at the late degrees of Libra in the 12th house, exactly like Foucault and Nietzsche. And ContraPoints also used to be a philosopher, so she's very, very similar. But she doesn't do with anything with power. I mean, her Pluto isn't even aspecting her sun, but her moon is in Pisces. And originally, ContraPoints wanted to be a musician. And you're probably thinking, why am I talking about ContraPoints and Nietzsche? Again, I'm just showing like the differences between them, right? Foucault has his moon in Aquarius, so he's very concerned with knowledge. While ContraPoints, she has her moon in Pisces. Fundamentally, she's a musician. Pisces is this very creative and God-oriented sign in the sense of like we're all together, we're all unified. It's a very compassionate and sensitive sign. And you see that with ContraPoints, like this kind of almost kind of sensitive artist rather than this diagnostic knowledge person like Foucault. The other thing about Foucault, and this is the most fascinating part of his whole thing, is he has his Sun and Venus in the 12th house. Like Nietzsche, except Foucault expands on the 12th house in a way that honestly helps me understand the 12th house in astrology, because the 12th house is actually a really hard house to understand. I don't know, it's always been an elusive house, and it is the house that is elusive. It's the house of hidden things, of hidden enemies, institutions. It rules over things like isolation, but also hospitals, prisons, and this is why it's so connected to Foucault and why it's so fascinating to me, because Foucault wrote so much about this idea of being isolated. He talked about, right, his book, Madness and Civilization. What's that about? It's about isolating people who are mad or who are irrational. And then his next book, The Birth of the Clinic, what's that about? It's about the medical gaze and hospitals, how people are isolated in such a way to better understand diseases, or changing how we look at diseases. And then if you look at his later books, Discipline and Punish, what's that about? Isolating criminals in the prison system. So it's just amazing just how 12th house Foucault is. Like, everything he writes about is about the 12th house. And if you think about the sun, people who have their sun in the 12th house, I mean, it can mean all kinds of things. Obviously, people who have their sun in the 12th house aren't going to be interested in hospitals. But it tends to create a lot of these themes of being in a hospital, being in a prison, being isolated, even being famous. A lot of people say that like the 10th and the 11th house deals with fame, obviously, because 10th house is career, 11th house is networks and groups and hopes and dreams. And then the 12th house is about isolation. But if you think about fame and being a famous person, you have to isolate yourself to be famous. Like, famous people are treated, they're isolated and away from society. They're outsiders of society. So again, 12th house has to deal with all of these Foucault-like concepts. Power relations that are working on the outside. Being influenced by things that we can't really see. Things that are hidden, right? Kind of like the 8th house. But the 12th house is about just like, it's the house of self-undoing in a lot of ways. And I think this is why Foucault and Nietzsche, I mean, it explains why they're famous. Because, I mean, if you have your sun already conjunct spica, that's almost a fame indicator. But if it's in the 12th house, you're going to be famous in a way that deals with isolation. And with Foucault, again, it's so literal in the sense that he studies hospitals, he studies prisons, he studies these institutions, these forms of architecture that are about isolating people. And I feel like I'm driving that home so much, but it's just so cool that you can see that in his chart, and it just shows you how true astrology actually is. Like, it's very true. So that was like the most interesting thing that I saw in his chart, was just the 12th house emphasis. But and even like with contrapoints too, like contrapoints, right? Like, does she study hospitals or anything like that? No, but like, she's this very creative person that works in isolation. She runs these live streams really late at night till the crack of dawn. You know, she's recording her videos all by herself for hours and hours and hours. Like, that's very 12th house. And it's very creative with that Pisces moon. So the last thing that I want to talk about with Foucault is how he died from AIDS. And the astrology lines up with this perfectly. The first thing is that he has Mars square Jupiter. And so Mars is aggression, sex, and Jupiter is higher wisdom and expansion. So when Mars touches Jupiter, these people have a very big sex drive. They go on sexual adventures. I mean, Foucault, he left Paris to go live in California, or he visited California quite a bit because it fit his sexual needs and proclivities. That crazy, and that's probably how he contracted. Well, I think that is. I mean, that's how he contracted it. And he contracted it at the time when AIDS was unknown. AIDS became a pandemic. Well, it became an epidemic in 1981, June 1981. Okay, so here's the astrology chart when AIDS became an epidemic in June. And if you look, we see a conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn. And Jupiter is almost about to make a conjunction with Pluto. And one thing I've seen in epidemics and pandemics is that before the beginning of a pandemic, you'll often find Jupiter is about to make a conjunction with Pluto, like 20 degrees apart. It marks the beginning of a pandemic. And I'm not making this up. This is very, very similar to COVID. I'll pull up the COVID chart. It's the exact same thing. Look, Jupiter is about 20 degrees from Pluto in Capricorn. And Saturn is involved as well. So like, and then it became a pandemic in the United States when Jupiter made a conjunction with Pluto in March. Like, it happened right on the dot. It's also the time where I almost died and got into a car crash because I was a Capricorn rising. These malefic planets, Saturn was involved, and also Mars is involved too, which happens later. But the point is, this is when a pandemic starts, and it reaches its pinnacle when Jupiter makes a conjunction with Pluto. And again, Saturn usually makes it worse because Saturn is the traditional malefic in astrology. And so if you look at Foucault's chart, so I got to shift back. Here's Foucault's chart. Foucault, again, he has his sun at exactly 21 degrees of Libra. So Pluto is right on his sun right now. Like, exactly. Pluto represents death and transformation. In this case, it's very literal. Like, you can see how, like, if you knew who Foucault was, if you heard about AIDS in 1981, and if you looked at Foucault's chart, you could instantly see, oh my God, this guy could definitely die from AIDS. And so when did Foucault contract it? We're not really sure when he contracted it. It probably could have happened in 1982 or 1983. So let's go to 1982. So that's when Mars moved into Libra as well, and actually made a conjunction with Mars, Saturn, and Pluto, which is a very nasty configuration. Mars and Saturn are the malefics in astrology, and when they come together, it can often mean diseases or expanding diseases if there is already a disease. And so, again, I just want to go back. If you look at Foucault's chart, right, he has his ascendant at 4 degrees of Scorpio. He has his Mercury at 8 degrees of Scorpio. He has his sun at 21 degrees of Libra. He has his Venus at 15 degrees, 11 degrees of Libra, sorry. So like all of these major planets are just going down on him. It's very similar to when I almost died from my car crash. I had Mars, Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter all in my first house. And that's how I almost died from my car crash. I got into my car crash literally the day when Mars made a conjunction with my ascendant. And so if we keep going, right, people say he could have gotten it in the summer, right? So that very well could have happened because the summer of 1982, that's when Mars and Pluto made a conjunction on his sun, probably in August as well. Probably this day, because Mars on your ascendant usually means when you get into an accident or something bad happens. Like it's just like the thing is, I just want to say right now, like look at how the astrology is lining up for this perfectly. Like this is why I think astrology is true, and I think it's so stupid when people don't believe in astrology, because like look, it's showing you the process of Foucault contracting the disease and then dying from it. Because when he actually died, he died from it, let's see, well, he got his symptoms in 1983. You know, he first got his symptoms. I mean, that's when Saturn moved into his first house. Saturn is limitation and restriction. When it's conjunct your ascendant, you're very limited. I remember reading in a biography that someone met Foucault last year in like I can't remember if it was 1982 or what, or 1983. And then a year later when he met him, he was shocked at how skinny Foucault was. He lost like 10 pounds. This almost always happens when Saturn enters the first house. People usually lose weight, or they look sickly, or they don't look as good because Saturn is limitation and restriction. And then when you go to, let's see, and then he actually died in 1984 in June. At the beginning of June of 1984, that's when Foucault started, that's when his illnesses really started to catch up with him. And it's so interesting too, because it's like right almost before, like, so you have these horrible malefic planets. You have Mars, Saturn, and Pluto all in the first house. That's usually terrible for health. Mars and Saturn meet up together. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can predict someone's death in astrology, or a lot of ways to see it, but I think it's so amazing how, like, Foucault died from a disease when Mars and Saturn, the malefics, were in his first house, and Pluto already went over his sun, which is the planet of transformation, and is about to go into his first house, which is literally, like, about real death and change and transformation. So obviously not everyone's deaths are match up perfectly like this in astrology, but with someone like Foucault, where he has this really strong emphasis in the 12th and the first house right here, and all of those malefic planets during AIDS, like, it lines up so perfectly in a way that, like, how can you deny this? How can you, like, not take astrology seriously? How can you ignore this? And he was also writing his book History of Sexuality. He was talking about technologies of the self, which is literally about self-transformation. I mean, it's just, Pluto is about death and transformation. Saturn is about limitation. Mars is about taking initiative and action, but it's also violence and destruction. It's so nuts how a lot of Foucault's, Mars is even also about sexuality. Like, it's just kind of nuts and so interesting how so much of what Foucault was writing about, even if AIDS was taken out of the picture, the book History of Sexuality and Technologies of the Self matches so well with these planets right here, because the first house is literally the self and the body, and again, Pluto's transformation. Saturn is about rebuild. It's about building things. It's limitation and restriction, but it's also about solid structures and making things permanent, concrete change. So I don't know. I just think it's incredibly fascinating. I love astrology. I love Foucault. that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. I hope you thought it was interesting the way I did. And I'm also doing chart readings. So if you want to buy a chart reading from me, send me an email at casperanza@gmail.com. I'm open for chart readings. And yeah, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.